Gittin, Daf Lamed Aleph Amud Aleph, the gift, Truma nitelet be'omed. Einstein is reputed to have said that not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. What's important in that is understanding that counting assumes that there is a numeric dimension to an object. If an object has a numeric dimension, it has 3 dimensions. It has length, it has breadth, it has height, it has weight. Those are all numeric dimensions. You can attach a number to it. And in that way, you can measure. You can have 5 eggs in a basket. You can have 24 eggs in a basket. You can attach numbers to objects that have quantitative dimensions. But not everything has quantitative dimensions, and not everything with quantitative dimensions is that important, is what Einstein was teaching in that comment. And we need to understand also in engaging with one another, we sometimes engage transactionally. We're doing business. I'm selling you an object that's worth $25. You pay $25 for the object. We're exchanging value. And in a transactional exchange of value, we do count. That's how transactions work. But when we gift something, it comes from a different place. And let's look at the sugya. Let's understand how the Torah views this area. There's a posuk in Parshas Korach when the Levim are given the mitzvah of Truma Samaisa. So we all have to give Truma to the Kohen. And Truma, it doesn't say in the Torah how much Truma we have to give to the Kohen. Even if you give a grain out of a whole enormous pile of wheat, you're Yotze Midoraisa. And the Rabbanan gave measurements around a 50th, between a 50th and a 100th, as the amount to give. We also give Maisa to the Levi. That's a 10th. And the Levi has to give a 10th of what he got from us to the Kohen, and that's called Truma Samaisa, to take Truma from the Maisa. And that's in these psukim. And to the Levim you should say, Ki tichum et b'nei Yisrael et ha'maaser asher natati lachem mitam b'nachalatchem. When you take the Maisa, the tithe from b'nei Yisrael, v'haremotem mimenu Trumat Hashem Ma'aser Min HaMa'aser. You need to give Truma from your Ma'aser. Ma'aser from the Ma'aser. So here the Torah does give a measurement. A 10th of the 10th that you're given, which means a 100th. Truma Ma'aser is 100th. And when we give Truma now from Perot of Eretz Yisrael, when we take Truma, the whole Nusach that we say includes the 100th of Trumat HaMa'aser that we take. And then the Torah says, V'neches shav lachem trumatchem. And this will be considered, your truma, your gifting will be considered kedagan min hagoren u'chmeleah min hayakev. Giving wheat from the goren and wine from the yakev. Says our Gemara on this posuk, Bishtei trumot hakatuv medaber. It says, V'nechshav lachem trumatchem. Your trumot will be considered as a truma. We're talking about 2 different trumot. Achat truma gdola v'achat trumat ma'aser. We're talking about both trumot. The truma that we give, the Yisrael gives, that 50th or whatever it is that we give to the Kohen, that's the one Truma, and the other Truma is the Truma the Levi gives to the Kohen from his Maisa, the Truma Samaisa. And what do we learn from this? That they follow the same halachot in certain areas. That is, Kashem she Truma Gedola nitelet be'omed uv'machshava. An amazing concept. That Truma Gedola is given, be'omed means with approximation. Uv'machshava, and you can give it by thought. Now that doesn't mean you can actually give it by thought. We'll see in Rashi what that means exactly. Kach trumat ma'aser nitelet be'omed uv'machshava. So trumas ma'aser as well can be given be'omed, by approximation, b'machshava. And we're going to focus on the first part, on the omed, the estimation. Says Rashi, what does machshava mean? Firstly, notein einav b'tzad zeh l'shem truma v'ochel b'tzad zeh. It might be Shabbos and you can't actually take the truma off. You can look at a piece of the article. You've got a basket of apples, or you've got an orange in front of you and you want to eat it, you've got to take Trumas and Maisa, but you're not going to actually take the Trumas and Maisa now. So you look at it and in your eye, you define what you're going to give to the Kohen, and then you can eat the other part of it. You can eat what's left and leave the part that you set aside in your mind. That's called B'machshava. V'afal pi shelo hifrish, even though you didn't actually take it aside, you just thought about it. That is sufficient in this discussion in the Rishonim. Does there have to be dibur or not? When you say machshava, when you say you can do it by thought, does that include speech or not? Do you have to actually say it or not? But most poskim hold no. It's enough just to think it, which is amazing. But what's interesting is the idea of the omed. What does it mean when it says Kashem shetruma gedola nitelet ba'omed uv'machshava? That omed part, does that mean it may be done by estimation, or does that mean it must be done by estimation? The right way to do truma is not to measure it out, but to estimate it. From Rashi a little bit here, and certainly in Beitzo there's a Rashi where Rashi is very clear, and he says, Hilkach ba'omed sagi. It's enough to do it ba'omed. It's okay if you did it by estimation, implying clearly you should measure it out and make sure you're giving the right amount. But if you gave it approximately, that's also okay. But the Ramban, there's a beautiful piece here, an essay of the Ramban on this piece of Gemara. Now the Ramban is so important in our canon of Lomdus, of what we learn. Because the Ramban, and bear this in mind because it's going to become very important in a moment, the Ramban was a Talmud of Talmidim of the Ritzvah. So the Ramban is in Spain. He learns from Talmidim of the Ritzvah. The Ritzvah is the brother of the Rash Mishans. The Rash Mishans is a very early Baal Tosfos. He's a Talmud of the Ri, and considered like the successor of the Ri. So the gigantic Baal Tosfos, or Rabbeinu Tam, who's like the founder of the Tosfos movement, and then Ri, his nephew, continues Rabbeinu Tam's work with his own style, and they're all from the school of Rashi, but Rashi is not, as we've often discussed, Rashi's role is not a Tosfotist role. Rashi's role is to look at each sugya as it is and explain it in a way that makes it easy to understand. He's like a cheder teacher. He stands next to you and explains the Gemara. Tosfos sees the whole of Shas as one system and integrates the whole system. And Rabbeinu Tam is where that started, certainly in the French school. We've learned that in the German school, the Rivot, and so there was a similar school that was developing, doing the same kind of work. So Rabbeinu Tam, the Ri to the Rash Mishans. So Rash Mishans is gigantic. The Rash Mishans's brother is the Ritzvah, who's the Rebbe of the Ramban. So the Ramban brings all the work of the Tosfotists to Spain and starts the yeshiva in Spain, which then becomes where the Rashba and the Ra'or learn, and where later on the Ritvah learns, and Rabbeinu Karkash and others are learning, all part of that Beis HaMedrash, all part of that school. So the Ramban says, "V'rabim omrim nitelet ba'omed af ba'omed." Many people say, and one of those people is Rashi, that nitelet ba'omed means you may take it ba'omed. Ve'eino kain, that's not true. Elo dafke ba'omed. You've got to do it ba'omed. The right way to give truma is to approximate, not to measure. Da'chitnan b'maseches trumas. And that's kind of quite hard for people to hear nowadays, because nowadays everything is with measurement. How big is the Kiddush cup? How long must the tzitzis be? How big must the ten? We measure it in centimeters and millimeters and grams and milligrams to be exact and so on. That was really introduced by the Chazon Ish because he was concerned that we'd kind of lost track of how these things need to be done. And people didn't have an intuitive sense and they didn't have a Masorah. So you can't just say, like, you do it like a friend of mine, Rav Rogozhnitsky. His father was a Rov in Wales, a big Talmid Chochem. And he asked his father once how big the piece of matzah has to be for the mitzvah of the kazayas on Pesach. And he said in like grams, in measurements. He said, I don't know, like I do it like my father did it. How big is a Kiddush cup? I don't know. I use a Kiddush cup the size my father used. But when that was lost after the war, the Chazon Ish felt the need to introduce measurements. And now we've made idols of the measurements. And we've lost all intuitive sense. So this is quite difficult when the Ramban says, no, don't measure. This is not to be measured. This is to be done ba'omed. That's the right way to do it. And that's based on the Yerushalmi, where the Yerushalmi says, Kein Rabbi Eliezer ben Gimel Omer, Minayin she'ein tormin lo b'midah v'lo b'mishkal v'lo b'minyan. This is based on a Girsa and a Tosefta, where it actually says, Ein tormin, you don't give truma b'midah v'mishkal. You don't measure. It's not right to measure. Based on that Yerushalmi, the Ramban gives his idea, and the Rambam paskins that way too. Ein tormim truma zu lo b'midah v'lo b'mishkan v'lo b'minyan. You don't measure out truma. You estimate it. Lefi shelo ne'amar b'shiur elo omed, because it doesn't give a shiur in the Torah. We're talking about truma gedola. Truma's meiser, there is a measurement given. So for Truma's meiser, it might be different. But for Truma Gedola, says the Rambam, it doesn't mention Truma in the Torah. So you do it approximately. Says the Ravid, Lo min Hashem uzeh, lakivan shelo nitna bo Torah shiur mutav sheyitrom bo'omed v'lo b'midah. The Ravid's a Chazon Ishnik. He says, I don't understand you, Rambam. Because a measure wasn't given, it's better just to calculate roughly, to estimate. Give us a measurement. Tell us how much. That's not a good reason just to say because the Torah didn't say how much, so we should just guess it. That doesn't make sense. That's not the reason. The reason is if you measure it out, you could make a mistake. And making a mistake, if you're measuring it out exactly, could be a big problem. What's the big problem? So we've got the Kesef Mishnah. This is the Mechaber. Remember, the Mechaber of the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, writes the Kesef Mishnah on the Rambam. And he quotes the Raavad. The Raavad says, I don't understand the Rambam. Says the Raavad, what do you mean you don't understand the Rambam? Hu yesod musad l'chol ma shiomar bezeh. This is a foundational principle in the Rambam. She'ilu hayta Torah notenet bo shiur, ya tzarich lafrish b'midah v'mishkal v'minyan. If the Torah would have given a measurement, you would have had to use a measurement. So what are you doing by measuring? You're attributing something to the Torah which the Torah didn't give us. That's a serious thing. You're measuring, the Torah didn't say measurement. So you're attributing measurement where there shouldn't be. And this, which the Raavad says, the Raavad's reason is very nice, but it's not mentioned anywhere in the Gemara. I have a problem with it. And then he says, V'Rabbeinu Shimshon katav. Who's Rabbeinu Shimshon? The Rosh Mishans. The Rosh Mishans, you remember, is the continuation of the school of the Ri. And the Rosh Mishans, because the Rosh also wrote on the Mishnah, he's about Tosfos, and he's quoted often in Tosfos throughout Shas, and he also wrote a parish on the Mishnah that's very important. And the Rosh says, Mitzvah litrom u'mad, you should do it by estimation, kedei she'yitrom b'ayin yafeh, so that you'll give generously. We'll analyze that in a moment. V'tam yafeu, and that's correct, and the right thing to say. And the Mishnah Lamelech explains the Raavad. We won't go into that now. A beautiful Mishnah Lamelech. The Mishnah Lamelech, also an important parish on the Rambam, 17th century. He was the Rav of Istanbul, Constantinople at that time. Built an important Mokum Torah in Istanbul or Constantinople in the 17th century and wrote the Mishnah Lamelech. So let's look at the Rash. Lo b'midah mitzvah la'asot mu'umad kedei she'yitrom b'ayin yafeh. And our Tosfos also. Tosfos follows the school of the Rosh Mishans. Rash Mishans, Tosfos. Tosfos also says, unlike Rashi, mitzvah litrom mu'umad mitoch she'arei l'tzamtzem. Tosfos explains it a little further. Each generation of the Rishonim expand a little bit on the generation before them, and it becomes a little clearer. Why will you give generously? Because you're afraid to be too close to the minimum. It says a mitzvah d'oraisa, you want to do it right. So you'll give a bit more. And that way it will land up that your truma will be more generous. Shelo yitel pachot, in order not to take less, and therefore notel ba'ayin yafa. And the Ramban then summarizes that truma gedola is definitely has to be ba'omed, has to be by estimation. Truma samaisa can be by estimation, but can also be ba'omed, because the Torah did give a measurement. But let's go into the mitoch she'arei letzamtzem shelo yitel pachot. This is more than religious yira shamayim. That's part of it. I'm afraid I'll give too little, so rather give more. But it's much more than that. When you think of it holistically, what the Rash is defining here, and Tosfos is explaining, is the idea of the difference between calculating and giving. Calculating comes from your left brain. That's your analytical side. You're thinking it through. So when you're transacting, that's where it's coming from. How much do I need to do? You measure it out. How much does it cost? What is the value? Is it worth it? You're using your left brain. In transaction, you're using your left brain. You're calculating. It's not coming from your heart. It's not intuitive. When you're gifting, it should be coming from your right brain. It should be coming from your heart. It doesn't matter if it's exact, as long as I'm not giving too little. So I'll give some more. You don't say, I'm going to so-and-so for dinner. How much is the dinner worth? He's probably going to spend $50 or so on me and $50 on my wife, so I'll get him a gift for $100. You go to the wine store and there's a beautiful bottle of wine, but it's $112. Anything for $100. I've got something for $90. No, that's not good. $100. That's not how you gift. You gift with an ayin yafa. It comes from a place of heart. And that's why it's called a truma. Truma means uplifting. You can't uplift in a transaction. A transaction doesn't uplift. A heart gift uplifts. When you give from the heart, it uplifts you and the other person and the object that you're giving. Everything's uplifted when it comes from the heart. Nothing is uplifted when it comes from the brain. And truma is upliftment. And upliftment comes from omed. Don't calculate exactly. Don't measure exactly. And the same with many of our mitzvahs. Don't measure it out exactly. Be sure that it's ein yafa. Be sure that your kiddush cup is big enough. Be sure that your matzah is big enough. You don't have to measure it out to the millimeter. Measurement means you're coming from left brain. You're coming from a place of calculation. Giving, intuiting, being generous comes from a place of heart, and it has a completely different impact on the relationship and on the object. It becomes truma, becomes harama, it becomes uplifting. And so when we're engaging with people, we need to question ourselves. Are we engaging as a form of transaction? Is the engagement coming from a mental place? Oh, I must make a note, I need to call so-and-so and wish him a happy birthday. It's in my diary, so you call him and you wish him a happy birthday, and then you cross it off your to-do list. That's transaction, there's no truma. But if it comes from a place of heart, oh my goodness, it's this person's birthday today. Isn't that wonderful? What a celebration. I need to call this person, spend some time with this person, wish this person well. Comes from a place of heart. That's a truma. And then you don't resent how long is the phone call going to take. I've got 25 seconds for this. That's as long as the phone call can take. Is that what I'm meant to be doing? Or does it come from a place I don't care? I want to just speak to this person. I want to connect with this person. That's the idea of truma. So when the Rash Mishan says, mitzvah la'asot mu'amad kedei sheyitrom ba'ayin yafa, to move it from left brain to right brain, to move it from head to heart. If you're measuring, it's in head. If you're gifting, it's in heart. If you're estimating, it comes from heart. Just be careful that it's ba'ayin yafa. Do it from a good place, from a generous place, to make sure that we're engaging in that way in all our engagements with people. Let it be something that comes from heart and right brain, and not from calculation and measurement of each thing that we do. So try and find an opportunity to remind yourself during the day of the importance of what we've learned, and try and catch yourself during the day transacting when you could be giving. And try and shift from left brain to right brain. Try and shift from midah to omed. Try and shift from measuring quantitatively to relating qualitatively and giving something generously from your heart.